America's Fury is published by Bloomsbury on the 16th of September. And that was Evan Osnos. Coming up in our first visit of the week to Cross Question, we have on the panel our very own Denise Headley, Tommy Sheppard, who is SNP MP for Edinburgh East, Greg Clark is the chair of the Science Committee, and also my MP, he's the MP for Tunbridge Wells, and Kate Andrew joins us too. She's economics editor at The Spectator. The lines are open, lots of questions you can ask today, busy news agenda 0345 6060 973, and you can of course watch us on Global Player, the LBC website, lbc.co.uk, or the LBC YouTube, Twitter and Facebook feeds.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, the UK's chief medical officers have decided 12 to 15-year-olds should be offered a Pfizer coronavirus vaccine. Dr. Mike Tilsley is a professor in infectious disease and says assessments were based on more than just the medical benefits, which are fairly small.
They've looked at the wider impacts, which include school closures, and that was why they have made the recommendation that in order to minimise the potential impact of COVID forcing schools to close or forcing lots of children to have to be absent, that's why this recommendation has been made.
Prince Andrew's lawyers are challenging a civil lawsuit by a woman in America who's accused him of sexually assaulting her 2 decades ago, something he strongly denies. The Duke of York's team says the legal papers weren't delivered correctly to him in the UK. More than 90 people have been arrested after climate change protesters partially blocked junctions on the M25. The group caused traffic chaos this morning. A giant leap forward in the potential reduction of pollution. Scientists have potty-trained cows. Normally their waste combines with soil microbes, which then produces greenhouse gases. Now these cows in Germany can do their business elsewhere. To the city, the FTSE 100 closed up 39 points at 70.68. The pound buys $1.38 and €1.17. LBC weather, showers for Wales and Western England tonight, lows of 12. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Zora Suleiman.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, very good evening. Another week, another Cross Question. It's 2 minutes past 8. Welcome to the programme. It's our weekly, well, it's not weekly panel debate show anymore, is it? It's 3 times a week, Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays at 8 o'clock. You can submit your questions by phoning 0345 6060 973. You can watch us on Global Player, the LBC website at lbc.co.uk, or the LBC YouTube, Facebook and Twitter feeds. Well, let me introduce you to my panel. On my left, it's Greg Clark. He's a Conservative MP for Tunbridge Wells and the chair of the Science and Technology Select Committee. Again on my left, always on my left, is our very own Denise Headley. Welcome back, Denise. Kate Andrews is economics editor at The Spectator. And on my far right, which is something that he will totally object to, is the SNP MP for Edinburgh East, Tommy Sheppard.
0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, let's start with our first caller, James in Watford. James, you have got what I think is one of the deepest and best questions we've ever had on Cross Question. Far away.
Oh, thank you. Well, good evening. 20 years after 9/11, is Western civilization in crisis, in meltdown, or is it stronger than ever?
That is deep, isn't it, Greg Clark?
It is deep. Your listeners contributed a very high-minded opening to the show. Just thinking back of those 20 years, I think it's evident that it was a profound moment, and I think some of the coverage that we've seen this weekend did mark it out as a turning point. I think no one ever expected that a Western country and America would be attacked in that way, and will never be the same again. But do I think that we're as strong as ever or in meltdown. Actually, I think these judgments that things are set fair or badly forever tend to be the wrong judgments. I think it was Francis Fukuyama who in the 1980s talked about the end of history after the end of the Soviet Union and the coming down of the Berlin Wall, that Western values had prevailed. Actually, very shortly afterwards, 2001 was not that long after that, that was shown not to be correct. So I think I think we always have to be vigilant, we always have to be active, and we have to constantly gear up and be prepared for new threats, because there's never the continuity that might seem to be available. We always have to be on our toes.
Kate Andrews, as the token American on our panel, I mean, you were, I imagine, not very old when 9/11 happened, but when you look at a question like that, it is such a profound one, isn't it?
Yes, and I fear I'm going to disappoint by not delivering the most profound and best answer that you've ever had on this panel, though you have had one of the best questions. I was 11 just, and in school in Connecticut, one state over from New York, when we got word that a plane had gone into the Twin Towers. And the majority of my life, certainly my whole adult life, has been defined geopolitically by America engaging in the war on terror. And I suppose watching the way that we have left has filled me with so much despair that, I think right and left in America, we had decided that we didn't want to be there anymore and that a lot of mistakes were made. And I think that was the correct calculation. But I can't help but feel, having been a kid when it happened, and only knowing us investing in that region, that we've let so many Afghans down by leaving in the way that we did. And I think, I'm not sure I would define the West as in crisis and meltdown or stronger than ever. I think it's deeply confused. And the way that we left and the muddleness of it reflects how confused America in particular is as a nation, because the news was not covering specifically what was happening on the ground in Kabul. It was covering the political fights in America over what was happening. There's not any sense of unity anymore, not even really what it means to be an American. And that worries me greatly, because that is very far away from the childhood that I knew.
Tommy Sheppard.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's positives and negatives that you can take out of it, to be honest. I try and be an optimist, Iain. So, looking at the positives first, I think there has been, in many parts of the world, there has been an approach that I would regard as more tolerant and more inclusive, and that people who have been historically had a lot of abuse and been discriminated against for their race, their gender, their sexuality, these things are not as prevalent or as acceptable as they were 20 years ago throughout most Western countries anyway. So that's an advance. I think there's been a global recognition of the climate crisis in a way that was, embryonic 20 years ago, but has now accelerated. And I think we'll see soon. But I mean, is I hope going to bring with it a sense of political purpose to act on that. So, but the awareness of it, I think, makes for puts humanity in a better position to survive. I hope. On the negatives, though, I think, worryingly, I think there has been an increase in religious zealotry throughout the world and intolerance, and particularly its influence in nation states and its influence in politics is of concern. And I don't just mean in the Islamic world. I mean, in aspects of what's happening in Western democracies as well, particularly in the US and the rise of the religious right. So that's been negative, and I think also what appears to be a desire, almost sort of an incremental movement towards the return of an arms race and a massive geopolitical standoff, and seeing the world as blocks that have to have a square go with each other, and as if we were kids in the playground. I mean, that's worrying. I think I had thought and hoped, that with the end of communism and the fall of the Berlin Wall, we might all get on together, but we seem to have found a whole different set of reasons for not liking people in Eastern Europe and on building weapons to so-called guard against any potential threat that they might operate. So there's it's a work in progress, I think, is the answer to the caller, and but signs for optimism along the way.
Which I think is interesting, because often in these discussions it's easy to be relentlessly pessimistic. So I'm glad you brought an optimistic angle to it. Denise, what's your view?
Are we in crisis, meltdown, or even stronger? I think the West needs therapy at the moment, and they need to spend some time in therapy and reassessing their position and how they negotiate with the rest of the world.
Who do you define as they?
When you say they?
Well, you were saying they need therapy.
Okay, so let's say America and Europe.
Okay.
Yeah, they need a large couch with a view to share. Yeah, so they can both share the space, because I think what's happened is you've actually seen a reduction in the value ideas of nation building, and as a consequence of that, they have to move out of Afghanistan. But essentially, what's happened is that these forever wars, going into people's countries, intervening in other people's affairs, I don't think there's any appetite for it anymore. And as a consequence of that, we've had to withdraw from Afghanistan. So I really don't think that we're in meltdown or stronger than ever. I think there's a time for reassessment, and it's about addressing our own ideas about who we are and who we think we are and what our foreign policy agendas are going to be in the future.
Do you think we've been too overconfident as to who we are, that we are the sort of defenders of democracy? Democracy is the only way for humankind. Do you think we're having to reevaluate that?
Well, if you're living in Afghanistan and you believe in what the Taliban believe in, that idea, it doesn't have any currency or any cogency. And I think what happens is that often we have a perception that our ideas are the only ideas on the table, and what's happened in Afghanistan says, frankly, that it's not. So I think what we need to do, when I say we, I mean America and Europe, we need to reassess. Europe needs to reassess, because basically they were just left in the lurch. America said thank you and good night and went about its business.
Not sure it even said that.
Okay, well, that's basically...
Wasn't that polite?
Yeah, okay. But essentially they said, we're not going to be doing this anymore. We're not consulting with you. And they just left, because I think in America now they've got different political priorities, and they don't necessarily include Europe in the way that they have in the last 20 years. So we need a bit more time in the couch.
Which, Greg Clark, is absolutely fundamental, isn't it? Because the NATO alliance rests on American leadership. It rests on America consulting, at least, if not consulting, at least informing its allies. None of that's happening now, and you've almost got Joe Biden playing a sort of Trump-light role, which no one expected.
Well, I think it was very concerning, and there's almost a kind of reverse symmetry, because of course the decision to go into Afghanistan was a NATO decision, and everyone joined together.
Well, it was wider than NATO, of course,
instantly wider than that, but it was I think it was the first time since the war in which the collective agreement of NATO was deployed, and at the end of that, for it to be in effect, as we saw, a unilateral decision on the part of America, I think was sad as a reflection of what was, if not a global, then an international initiative done for very immediate, but also, I think, high-minded reasons. And that is a concern. I think, as Denise says, it does seem to reflect the settled will of what seems to be, as far as one can tell, a majority of people in America, insofar as both the current president and his predecessor committed to this. And if that is what we're talking about is the exercise of democracy, and if the two parties, the two successive presidents, have come to that view and put it before the people, and the presidential election was not silent about this, then sometimes, as we know, democratic opinion and democratic decisions may not be the ones that everyone feels most comfortable with, but it's foundational that you have to respect them.
Let's hear what James in Watford thinks about his own question. James, go ahead.
Thank you. I was watching the BBC documentary about inside the White House and the experience of George Bush during the
it was amazing,
period.
Wasn't it?
Well, it was after you recommended it, as a matter of fact. So I thought, I watched that.
Such influence.
I really enjoyed it. But it did make me think about the passengers on the UA-93, which I would describe as astonishing bravery in the circumstances. And I've never heard anyone disagree with that, but it sometimes feels as though even that isn't something that, everyone can't be, passionately in agreement about. That there were some incredible moments in which it brought people in New York and around America together. So it sometimes feels as though there's even conflict about some of the most fundamental things that I would have thought would just get agreement. On the other hand, maybe I just spend too much time on Twitter. I don't know.
Well, I think one of the interesting things, and I don't know if you saw it, Kate and Tommy, but I think a lot of people reevaluated their view of George W. Bush after watching that documentary. He came over in a very different way, I think, to how people had imagined. And his actions on that day were explained in a way, I think at the time people thought, well, where is he? Why isn't he sort of saying more? And when he was sitting in front of that class of children, people saying, well, he should have got out of there. And he very patiently explained why he didn't.
I haven't watched it yet. I'm looking forward to doing so. There's been quite a lot written about W over the years and how he handled that day. And I remember it very vividly, seeing him on the television screen, and you watch it over and over and over again, and I suppose your perspective on it does change. I remember from a pretty young age feeling sympathetic towards him in that moment. I mean, what were you going to do? Scare the group of children in front of you? It was a horrible thing for any president to find out, and he clearly made mistakes along the way, as I think every president has, who's overseeing our time in Afghanistan. But I think your caller makes such an interesting point, and I go back to this point of unity as well. You never want tragedy to bring you together, but there have clearly been times in recent American history when we've been far more united than we are now. And strangely enough, leaving Afghanistan was one of the few points that was uniting the Republican and Democratic Party. And yet we've managed to completely ruin the process and the logistics in which we've done it anyway. And it's very rare that you find those moments these days that we might agree on anything. And I don't want any more tragedy to bring us together. I want something positive. But it's pretty grim in America right now in terms of that.
Tommy?
I've not watched it, Ian. Maybe
I highly recommend it. I'm trying to.
Well, I will do. You make him sound like Alan Alda in The West Wing.
I think it's something like 9/11 inside the White House,
right?
Something like that.
I'll have a look, but I mean, I don't think there's any good or bad way to respond to that. It was so horrific. I mean, I remember just being, I was on a telephone call, and my mate, who was a press officer in the Scottish Parliament, said, "Get to a TV screen right now," and just switched it on, and it was just so unbelievable. We had never witnessed or seen anything like this before. It was, I 4,000 miles away was dumbstruck and paralysed. So if you're right there as the president, I can imagine it's not going to be easy. So I wouldn't criticise anybody for how they reacted on the day. I think the big questions are what happened over the 20 years after. It
is called 9/11 Inside the President's War Room, and you can get it on the iPlayer. We'll come to more of your questions in a moment. 0345 6060 973. It's 17 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
At 8:20, Cindy says, missed the lineup announcement. He's got a fab voice, the first speaker on the first question. Who is he? That's you, Greg Clark.
Well, I'm very glad.
Conservative MP for Tunbridge Wells. Denise Headley is with us, Kate Andrews from the Spectator, and Tommy Sheppard, the SNP MP for Edinburgh East. Our next question comes from your manor, Denise. David in Enfield. Hello, David.
Good evening, panel. Hope you're all well.
Hi.
Good evening.
Hi, good evening.
My question is to do with the upcoming cuts in the universal credit. My question is, why do full-time workers in 21st century Britain have to rely on government benefits to make ends meet?
Denise.
Low wages. That's one of the reasons why we don't have people are using benefits to supplement their income. Small wage increases is another reason why people are using benefits to supplement their income. Also, I think it's to do with the cost of living. It's very high. So for argument's sake, a packet of crisps last year might have cost you 50 pence. This year it's now £1.50.
No, it isn't.
It is.
Inflation, come on, it's at
very
2.5%.
expensive. Okay, back in the day you could buy a packet of crisps for 50p. Now you can't even get a packet of crisps for less than £1.
I can tell you where you can.
But but essentially,
I love a packet of crisps.
So do I. That's why I use that analogy. But but the reason I'm saying so is because I think the cost of basic items have gone up, and it's not matched with the cost of increase of people's wages. So things are more expensive. Energy, food, and all those things create people having to supplement their income with benefits. And I think that's one of the main reasons why you've got so many people who are in work who are effectively also living in poverty. Not forgetting the cost of renting. The cost of housing is hugely expensive. So the amount of disposable income that you might be putting onto your rent far exceeds often the amount of money you're getting in.
So this £20 a week that was introduced, 18 months ago as a temporary measure that the government, I'll say they're going to finish in October. It was always said to be a temporary measure, but what's your reaction to the fact that they say they are going to cut the £20 again?
I think it's really detrimental to working families and also those people who are on the lowest incomes in our community, because unfortunately too many people actually rely on benefits to supplement their income because they can't afford to live with the salaries they already have. And I think what this is going to do, I think it's going to equate to something like, £1,000 over the course of a year for people who are already struggling. And I think it's going to see more people living below the poverty line. So what you're going to end up with, I think, is going to be people having more difficulties just getting basic items. And unfortunately, I can't see anything changing unless Greg might be able to tell us something else.
We'll come to Greg in a minute. But first, let's go to Kate. Politically, you can see the argument for keeping the £20 because, the cost of living, as Denise says, certainly hasn't gone down over the last year, has it? What do you think about this?
The problem with making a temporary measure in emergency times permanent in this way, there's several. The first being that you might actually be sending the message to the government that they should be less generous next time. People in this country, millions of people, had their wages paid for by the state, and the Chancellor was right to throw money in this emergency situation. He didn't want people feeling like they had to go to work when it was dangerous for their health to do so. But if you start insisting that what was a temporary measure stays in this way, the next time there's an emergency, the government may well be more nervous to dish out the cash, knowing that people are going to say, well, you need to keep it. If you want to make the argument to increase universal credit, you should do it through proper debate. And those who want to keep that £20 uplift should say how we're going to pay for it.
But it's quite difficult. If you're a government that is proposing a levelling up agenda, surely the very people that you want to level up are not just people who rely wholly on benefits, but people who are described as the working poor, people who, if wage levels were higher, wouldn't need to have to take universal credit. Politically, it doesn't really add up, does it?
I am
if you have a levelling up agenda.
Looking forward to the day that the government, maybe Greg, I'm sorry to put on the pressure, can tell me what levelling up means in a sentence. I still have absolutely no idea what it means.
It's pretty obvious, isn't it?
Not really. Is levelling up investing in local infrastructure in the north? Is levelling up increasing our welfare state? I do not know really simply what levelling up is. What I do know is if you are passionate about uplifting universal credit, you need to say what we aren't going to fund, because we just gave a heck of a lot of money to the NHS. You need to say what you might cut. You need to say which taxes you're going to raise next. You need to do it as a proper separate debate and not just try to extend emergency measures. And if I can just really quickly on wages, I think one of the arguments for rolling this back now is that because of the pandemic and Brexit overlapping, we've had 1 million workers, it's estimated, leave the UK. There are a record number of job vacancies in this country right now, over 1 million, and average wages have skyrocketed. I think the year-on-year 3-month average for wages is up 8.8%. We have had a decade of wage stagnation, and the working poor have gotten the worst deal. There's no question about that. But if there were any time to say to people, you are in a really powerful position to go and get yourself a wage increase or a new job with better pay, this is it.
Okay.
So this might be the moment to do that.
Tommy, another bit of optimism there.
Yeah, maybe. Look, the last 18 months have been hard for everyone, but it strikes me there are two groups of people for whom it's been hardest. One is low-paid workers who have not had the benefit of furlough schemes and all the rest of it, who have kept working every day, every week, throughout the entire 18 months, providing essential services to keep the rest of society going. Care assistants, delivery drivers, shop workers, people in retail and hospitality. And they're one group. Another group are people who were in precarious employment to start with and who were made redundant as a result of the COVID pandemic. And these two groups of people are two of the main recipients of the universal credit uplift. So it seems to me quite a kick in the teeth to say that as we remove the 400 billion support that the government has given, the first group of people on the firing line are those who can least afford to deal with it, and we take it away from the poorest people first. That seems to me shocking, immoral, outrageous. I don't know why there isn't, why there aren't more riots in the street about this. Really, it really is so manifestly and blatantly unfair. And I wish there wasn't universal credit. The reason why there is universal credit is because our wage inequality in this country is so vast that the state determines that lots of people aren't earning enough to actually afford a basic level of subsistence. So that's why they are eligible for social security support through the benefit system and through universal credit. I would like to see wages dramatically better than they are, and I would like to see the gap between those who earn the most and those who earn the least begin to reduce significantly. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And we can't, it's unsustainable, I think, this.
It doesn't keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
It does.
It's been pretty stagnant for a long time now.
The best paid people in our society are now earning an awful lot more times the lowest paid than what they ever used to.
But
so the ratio between those who are paid the least and those who are paid the most has got significantly bigger over my lifetime, and it continues to do so. So that needs to be tackled at some point. I would like to see, universal credit not necessary. I'd like to see everyone earn a decent wage. But until we get to that point, it's an important lifeline. And if we take this away, there are going to be consequences. This is not something that is consequence-free. A lot of people are going to suffer. A lot of people's physical and mental health is going to suffer. And all of this is going to pile pressure on our already stretched public services. So, I think if there is one thing the government should do in the next 4 weeks, it is review and reverse its decision to end the universal credit uplift. And apart from anything else, I'll finish with it, apart from anything else, it was brought in as a temporary measure to deal with the COVID crisis. The COVID crisis hasn't gone away. It's still there. 30,000 people got infected yesterday. So while that's still going on, the measures should still be kept in place.
Paul in Bedford says the retail recommended price on Walker's crisps is 69 pence, Denise. But you knew that anyway. Greg?
Well, so I think Tommy makes a good point that it clearly was brought in as a temporary measure to deal with COVID. And we can debate whether this is the right time to stand that down, whether we are moving back to a more normal situation. But I do think it points to what Kate was saying. I commend the government for being very agile at very short notice in doing things that were completely without precedent to help protect people during the early phases of the pandemic. The furlough scheme, for example, if we were sitting around this table 2 years ago, the idea that the state will be paying the wages of millions of people would have been thought unthinkable. And it was included was help for the self-employed. And also as part of that package, there was a recognition that there weren't jobs around, people couldn't work extra hours. And so there was a similarly time-limited increase in universal credit, always designed to be part of that package. Now, no one is going to say that to be on universal credit means that times are not hard. I completely recognise that, and there's debate to be had as to what the appropriate level of benefits is. But when we are going back to work, we're sitting around a table next to each other. Last time I appeared, it was remotely. People are going back to school. People are going back to cafes, to pubs, to restaurants. Furlough is coming to an end. The self-employed scheme is coming to an end. So it was part of a package. And I do think that if anything that you bring in, for an emergency and the right thing, if then you can never, even as you announce it right from the beginning, stand it down at the end of that emergency, then I think you're less likely to do it in the first place.
But they could have said, well, look, we do believe in the levelling up agenda. We recognise that a lot of people who are on universal credit are on it through no fault of their own, and so therefore we want to help them, lift them out of it. And I take Kate's point about where you have to say how you're going to pay for it, absolutely. I take that as read. But politically, it's very difficult to take away something that you've given to people.
It is, and that is why, obviously, it's a painful thing to do. But it's not taking away something that was unexpected. For people, I do understand and concede that for people that have had the extra £20 a week, they're going to have less. But the point I'm making about taking it away is that when it was introduced, alongside furlough, along with the self-employed scheme, it was a COVID measure. And if we are coming out of COVID, I think we have to have a separate discussion as to what is the right level and structure of benefits. And also in the points that Denise was making about pay. I mean, that is crucial. And one of the things that has happened, even during the pandemic, is that the national living wage has increased, actually at a higher rate than would have been the pure inflation rate.
I quite like the idea of a national living whale, to be honest. But, right, we'll come back to your questions in just a moment. 0345 6060 973. David, thank you very much for that. It's 8:33. Zora Suleiman has the news headlines.
The UK's chief medical officers have decided coronavirus vaccines should be rolled out to healthy 12 to 15-year-olds. All children in that age group will be offered one dose. They say the decision was about balancing risk and benefit. Prince Andrew plans to challenge a US court's jurisdiction over a civil lawsuit by a woman who accused him of sexual assault 2 decades ago. A lawyer for the Duke of York said the prince also claims that he wasn't properly served the legal papers. The pre-trial hearing gets underway in around 30 minutes' time. More than 90 people have been arrested after climate change protesters caused severe delays on the M25. The group, Insulate Britain, blocked several junctions in Surrey, Kent, Essex, Hertfordshire and around Heathrow Airport. They've warned that is just the start of their action. LBC weather: showers for Wales and Western England through the night, a low of 12 degrees.
This is LBC.
From entrepreneurs
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:37 tomorrow night on Cross Question. We have a bit of an eclectic bunch, it has to be said. We have Amanda Milling, the chairman of the Conservative Party, as she likes to be known, well, for the next couple of days anyway. Andrew Gwynn, former Labour Shadow Cabinet Minister, he's going to be on, and the political consultant Alec Dean, together with John McClure, who is the lead singer of the Reverend and the, what was it, Reverend and the what? Makers. They are a popular beat music combo, I gather, Your Honour. Right, we have with us Tommy Sheppard from the SNP, Greg Clark from the Conservatives, Denise Headley from LBC and Kate Andrews from the Spectator. Let's go to our next caller. It's Chris in Croydon. Hello, Chris.
Oh, good evening, Ian. Good evening, panel.
Good evening.
Yes, my question for the panel is this. Is exchanging rule from London for rule from Brussels, as Nicola Sturgeon would have it, truly Scottish independence, or simply an expression of Anglophobia?
Tommy Sheppard. Now, this is an interesting one because, of course, Nicola Sturgeon has been making a speech to the virtual SNP conference today, setting out a timetable for another independence referendum. She said that the UK was making Scotland poorer. So, swapping London for Brussels, is that true independence?
Well, I don't see it in those terms, to be honest. I see it as whether or not we wish to assert the right of people who live in Scotland to determine their own affairs and their own future, including the relationships they have with other people, both other countries in the island of Britain and the rest of Europe and the world. And if people wanted to be part of the European Union in Scotland, then I believe they should have the political capacity to do so. And clearly, opinion is different north and south of the border on the question of Europe. We voted very differently on Brexit. And the prospect of Scotland being an independent European nation and being able to benefit from being part of a 500 million strong market is, I think, an increasingly attractive one. So that's what the debate is. It's not about whether you move from taking orders from London to Brussels. It's about whether you have the political capacity to determine for yourself the partnerships you have with others. And at the moment, despite where Scottish public opinion is and where the elected Scottish Parliament is, these matters are not of our are nothing to do with us really, and all decided for us. So.
But given 85% of Scottish trade is with the rest of the UK, why would you forego the UK single market for the European single market?
Well, I think, well, we wouldn't. I mean, so the objective would be to try and get a solution which protects our ability to trade as a nation, both within Britain and within Europe. So it will have to be some sort of bespoke position when we actually get to drawing up the prospectus for what it means.
Given the existing problems with Northern Ireland, they would be writ large, wouldn't they?
Well, they would, and I think all eyes are on Northern Ireland to see if the protocol can be revised and settled down, and if there is a workable way in which Northern Ireland can be both part of the United Kingdom and also part of a framework engaged with Southern Ireland and the rest of the European Union. But whatever happens, it's going to be a unique situation if we were to get there, and it will have to have a unique and bespoke solution. But I think, Ian, to be honest, we're probably getting ahead of ourselves, because what today's speech by the First Minister was about was asserting the right of people in Scotland to be able to make that decision in the first place, which was precisely what the elections were about in May, which the SNP won fairly handsomely, getting 49% of the vote. So, that's why the new Scottish Parliament is determined to go ahead and give people the opportunity to decide on this question for themselves. And I can assure you that when we get there, it won't be a side of a bus that will be the argument. There will be a full written prospectus that details exactly what the proposition is and how it will work.
I look forward to reading it. Kate?
I can't imagine trading London for Brussels. I think it's a bad idea. But, and I am heartbroken to say this, I think that the circumstances between Brexit and the May elections have changed enough that Scotland probably deserves their second referendum. And that should be part of the ballot. I mean, if Nicola Sturgeon really wants to rejoin the European Union, then Scots need to know that is her plan when they vote whether or not they want to stay or go from the rest of the UK. Or if she wants another referendum after that to decide whether or not Scotland is completely independent in the EU, that needs to be put to the people as much as the question of being in or out of the UK. But, circumstances have fundamentally changed. I'm not sure now is the appropriate time.
To be fair, she's not saying now. now. It should
she's
be in
not.
2023,
No,
which Alex Salmond is not very pleased about.
Exactly. I think that there are mixed feelings within the Nationalist well, not really coalition there, but I'm not sure now is the appropriate time.
Okay.
But and it breaks my heart to say it. I mean, I really hope Scotland would stay. But I do think the circumstances have changed.
Greg Clark, that is a fair point. Circumstances have changed. I've written about this in the Telegraph tomorrow, and to my mind, if as somebody like me who supported having a Brexit referendum and allowing people to decide, it's very difficult to say that Scotland shouldn't have that same opportunity when, as Kate says, circumstances have changed materially since 2014.
Well, I think it's the same proposition in this respect. At the time of the Brexit referendum, it was made clear by everyone that it was not going to be repeated, that people had to make a serious decision because it was once in a generation, once in a lifetime. People use different words, but that was clearly understood, that there was a lot of moment on that decision. But
people voted in 2014 on the basis that the safest place for Scotland was within the Union and within the EU, and there wasn't really a prospect of Britain leaving at that point, was there?
Well, I don't think if you have a referendum and you say, indeed, it was the adopted policy of the leading party in government that we would have a referendum on the European Union, and so that was known during the referendum. It didn't cause people to say, well, of course, we'll have this referendum, and then if the Conservatives take us out of Europe, having won the election, which they're committed to have the referendum on, then we'd have another one. That was not. People with a full knowledge of the fact that there was liable to be a referendum on Brexit said that the independence referendum.
All right. Well, even if we accept that, the SNP, as Tommy says, won the May election. Specifically, in their manifesto, it said we want a second referendum. They've gone into a sort of coalition with the Greens that takes them over 50% of the vote and over 50% of the seats. That is a democratic mandate.
I think if you have a referendum, it has to have a degree, not of permanence, clearly. There's a time in which it is expired. But the reason that people from all sides said, do take this very seriously, because it is a once in a generation, I think it is something that you don't
take into account this democratic mandate at all.
I think I take into account the democratic mandate that was the referendum,
but in which people... Wouldn't it be better, sorry to keep interrupting, but wouldn't it be better for Boris Johnson to say, OK, bring it on. We recognise that you did win the election on that basis. Bring it on. Well, we'll have the debate. I'm going to put forward a very positive view as to why Scotland should remain in the Union. We're not going to do all this Project Fear stuff. It's going to be a positive, uplifting debate. Take the fight to Nicola Sturgeon. That to me seems to be the only thing he can do now.
Well, he could do that, but I think it goes back to the point. I don't think you should have repeated referenda until you get the result.
You keep repeating that argument.
Well, I do, because it's the argument that I think. But there's another point. I don't quite understand the logic of the order of having the call for a referendum now and then the plan for what Scotland would do if independent, whether it's to be a member of the EU. I don't know whether Scotland would be part of the euro. I mean, I would have thought that actually you would have the plan and say, right, this is how it's going to be. Now campaign for a referendum, but it seems to be the other way around.
Denise, I'm going to ask for a slightly shorter answer from you on this one.
Okay. I think essentially that Nicola Sturgeon is a really excellent politician in many ways, and she is playing very clearly to those individuals who want a second referendum. It's vitally important that she wins next time around when she goes out to the electorate, and I think that's a key issue that people want to see all over again. So I don't really think it's going to be difficult for her not to have that as a policy. That is the thing I think that unites many Scottish people.
But should that referendum, I mean, we're going slightly away from Chris's question here, but should Boris Johnson say, yes, you can have that referendum, or should Nicola Sturgeon just do it anyway?
I don't think she can do it anyway. I'm not sure what the legal basis is for her to act independently, almost like I think they did it in Spain at one point, but I don't think that that's the case. I don't think it can work that way. But like you said, Scotland was taken out of the EU without their vote. They didn't want to leave. So what do they do now? And essentially, it's basically their version of Brexit. And it's very difficult for people who argued for Brexit to not then say you can have a similar exercise in Scotland.
Well, I rather agree with that. Tommy, you wanted to come back?
Just very briefly, I mean, I disagree with what Greg said about that it's essentially the same proposition. I believe that circumstances have changed fundamentally, but I want to say it doesn't really matter if you think circumstances have changed fundamentally or enough. It doesn't matter if you think enough time has passed. The thing that top trumps all of that is what do the people in Scotland actually think and what have they voted for. And they have just voted to have another say on this matter. And they've elected a Scottish Parliament on that basis. Now, I think that mandate should be respected. I think the best thing for the Conservative government to do in Westminster is to work with the Scottish government to organise that referendum in this sort of way that it was done in 2014. But I hope they will do that. I'll work for them to do that. But if they don't, there will be a referendum, Denise. We have a mandate to deliver on a referendum, and if democracy means anything, then that has to happen. And then it will be for the UK government to decide whether it respects that or not.
I feel in my water this is going to be a subject we return to quite a lot over the next couple of years on LBC. Chris, thank you very much indeed for your question. More to come. It's 8:48.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
Don't forget, if you miss an episode of Cross Question, you can always catch up on the Cross Question podcast, or you can download it and watch it on Global Player or the LBC YouTube channel. Right, let's go to our next caller. We're still with Tommy Sheppard, Greg Clark, Denise Headley and Kate Andrews. Pin your ears back. It's Sean in concert. Hello, Sean. Well, it was supposed to be anyway. Are you there, Sean? Don't let me down. No, we can't get hold of Sean, which let's go to Simon in Southampton instead. Hi, Simon.
I'm a close second. Good evening. Right, Boris Johnson has let it be known that he plans to be in power for 10 years. I predict, however, and pray that he will be gone on or before the next election, hopefully with the rest of the party with him, but let's just keep it at Boris Johnson. Which is more likely?
Well, you say he's let it be known. I'm not sure that's an accurate description. There was a newspaper story saying that Boris wants to go on and on and on. Not a single quote, I don't think, in that story, but it's possible. There was another Prime Minister who wanted to go on and on and on, and I think about a year later she was ousted from power. Denise Headley, 10 years of Boris or gone by the next election?
I don't know if Boris Johnson is actually going to be gone by the next election, because I think there's fundamental problems in terms of who is his opposition. So I think the left is far too fragmented, and that's as a consequence of that, you can't win in those in the seats that you need to win in. I think the first past the post system ensures that big parties maintain their position, and unfortunately Labour can't seem to catch up either. I think there needs to be a much stronger coalition on the left so that people can start thinking across the piece. So I would like to see different parties, just like they've done in Scotland, joining together so that you can actually get different types of results. I think, unfortunately, there needs to be a huge programme in voter ID and voter registration, because 2 million people have been knocked off the electoral register with the election bill that's come in. So I do think there's a strong likelihood that he will be in power, because I think it's important to remember, I think it's only 13 million people that put Boris Johnson in power. That's a fraction of the number of people who actually are present in the country. So more people didn't put him in, but more people voted using the current system. So I think those are fundamental things we have to change.
Greg Clark.
I think he will want to go on. It's he's something of a historian, and as are you, Iain. We're going to be talking about your history books on Saturday for any listeners in the Cranbrook area.
Nice plug.
But you will know that Prime Ministers rarely depart voluntarily early. Harold Wilson's obviously an exception to the rule. And I don't think that Boris Johnson's ambitions in terms of what he wants to do to the country, I mean, we referred briefly to levelling up, and whatever you might think of it, that is not something that can be done in a blink of an eyelid. That is a substantial ambition to rebalance Britain. And I think he's serious about it. I think he'll want to carry on. To a certain extent, the last 18 months with COVID necessarily has concentrated a lot of attention on that. So there's a sense in which some of the things that might have been prominent over the 18 months will be just being turned to, at least in terms of the profile.
Tommy?
I mean, I'm sure he'll want to go on and on. I think he has more problems than what we think at the moment, though. I mean, a week is a long time in politics, and it's a long time to the next election. And I think Boris Johnson's problem, excuse me, is that he's fighting on quite a number of fronts at once. I mean, he has to try and hold on to these red wall seats in the north of England, and I think some of his big economic policies as they play out, such as the national insurance hike, the universal credit cut, when these are shown to disproportionately affect some people in these northern poorer areas, he's going to start losing some of that support. But at the same time, he's got the yellow wall. He's got the Liberal attack in some of the Shire seats and some of the metropolitan areas that used to be sort of Liberal Tory strongholds. And I think the illiberal attitudes of the government and their attitude towards everything from refugees to voter ID is showing that he's losing support in that ground as well. So it would be I think it would be almost impossible to conceive of Labour or anyone else forming a majority government at the next election. But it's not so impossible to actually imagine the Conservatives losing their current majority and not having an overall majority. And in any such circumstances like that, I think there will be a huge willingness to do what Denise has just said, and that is to form a coalition government which is non-Conservative in nature.
Kate?
I agree with Tommy that it's a difficult coalition to hold together. And as we see the consequences of certain policies that have gone through, that will become a harder sell. I don't love either of Simon's options because I'm not convinced by either. But if I had to pick one, I would say he will be there for another 10 years. He just got his Tory MPs to vote for breaking the manifesto pledge of hiking taxes. I mean, behind the scenes, they're fuming.
And breaking the pensions triple lot.
Breaking the pensions triple lot, but particularly a Conservative government hiking taxes in this way after just less than 2 years of that manifesto, or just 2 years of that manifesto. I mean, it is unbelievable what he's pulled off here, and I think that's because even if they're fuming, so many of the current Tory MPs believe, probably rightly, that they have their jobs because of Boris Johnson, not because of the Conservative Party, but because of Boris Johnson. And to Denise's point, I mean, who else is going to challenge him? There's a real rise of the Green Party here that is devastating for Labour, and the UK is actually behind on that if you look at European trends. I think life might get a lot more difficult for the Labour Party in the near future. So if you're going to force me to pick, it's going to be another 10 years.
Simon, thanks for that. I think we all got your view on your own question from the question. Right, quick answers from each of you on this. We haven't managed to get Sean back on the phone, but I have got his question here. I won't do the accent. Are the police scared of these climate demonstrators on the M25? Why can't they do their job properly? Tommy Sheppard, as the person who represents a constituency way away from the M25, I think you've seen what's happened today, where various junctions have been stopped by small groups of protesters, and initially the police just stood there and watched.
And Sean wants them all.
He wants them all arrested, jailed, hung, drawn, and quartered. Probably.
I think that's an operational decision for the police on the ground too. But I mean, nothing is consequence free. If you take one action, then it provokes another reaction. So I presume the police operated in the way that they felt was best to maintain best public order in the circumstances. But people have to have a right to protest, and sometimes protest means that things get disrupted, and so that people can pay attention to it. And if ever there was something to protest against, it is the climate emergency.
Denise, I was watching one of the protests earlier, and there were about 15 protesters and about 25 police, and you're thinking, well, why aren't they doing something?
I think it's going to be difficult for the police to do what we want them to be doing, which is we want, and when I say we, I mean the pejorative we want things to be as they were. We don't want to experience any discomfort. But change has to be uncomfortable, otherwise it's not change. So therefore, insulating Britain, Extinction Rebellion, Black Lives Matter, all those social movements are going to create change of some degree, either forcefully or gently, but change is on its way. And the police they've got powers now, more than they had with the crime and sentencing bill, but I don't think they're not doing their jobs. I just think they're doing it in a more cautious fashion.
Do you not think, though, that these sorts of protests actually turn people off? I can't imagine a single person watching what's gone on today and thinking, oh, that's convinced me to support the climate change activists.
Well, I'm sure that they asked the same question with Emily Pankhurst. She got in the way of the horse. The facts are you have to create disruption. Not everyone is going to come to you straight away. It might take time, but we don't have time with the climate emergency. So
we're talking about it.
Well, we are talking about it, but we're talking about the policing of it rather than the policy. This is one of those occasions, Denise, where you hate me because I've got to point out it wasn't Emily Pankhurst and the horse. It was another one.
Right. Basically, someone got run over.
I get your point.
She was trying to get the votes, and she got run over by the King's. She got run over by the King's horse.
Greg Clark.
I think it is counterproductive. I haven't seen the pictures of the policing here, but what Denise referred to is a bill. It needs to go through Parliament, and the essence of that is to have a sense of proportionality. There was a ludicrous thing a few months ago in which climate protesters were stopping the Docklands Light Railway, an electric railway, from taking people to and from work. And that has consequences for people. There are people on those trains who've got to pick up their kids from the nursery who are getting distressed that they can't get there.
And that needs to be borne. They got taken off the roofs of the train. Kate, I'm going to assume that you might kind of agree with Greg.
I just have one sentence to say, and that's according to The Independent, as about 3 hours ago, they did arrest 90 people. So the police were there.
What about the rest is what I would say. Right, final text from Jean in Kettering. All this crisp chat is making me hungry. What's your favourite kind of crisp? Now, that's think about the first question we had and compare it to that one. Tommy Sheppard, are you a crisp lover?
Smoky bacon.
Okay.
Cheetos.
What?
Cheetos. American over here. They're just a really delicious cheesy crisp.
Okay.
Highly recommend.
Dog breath, cheese and onion crisp. That's what we used to call it at school. Denise?
Salt and vinegar. I used to love cheese and onion, but I don't know. I love.
You're not very adventurous, are you?
Well, I do. I mean, I do like jerk flavour crisp, plantain chips, but hey ho.
Greg?
I'm afraid salt and vinegar is what I tend to go for.
This side's way more adventurous.
I like these new KFC crisps. Anyway, right. Thank you to my panel, Greg Clark, Denise Headley, Kate Andrews and Tommy Sheppard. As I say, tomorrow evening we have Amanda Milling, the chair of the Conservative Party, Andrew Gwynn, Labour MP, political consultant Alex Dean and John McClure from the Reverend and the Makers. Join us then. Coming up in a moment, we're going to talk more about these M25 protests and the policing of them. It's 9:02.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This